This seminar is a workshop, rather, we're going to call it that. Workshop is how to convince someone to get psychiatric help, presented by Dr. Mark Komrad, a psychiatrist on the teaching faculty of Johns Hopkins University, and a professor of psychiatry at the University of Maryland and Tulane University. I, your moderator, am a volunteer with NAMI. I teach family to family and NAMI basics. I also train teachers for basics, and I serve on the board for NAMI Montgomery County as secretary. Dr. Comrad's very popular book is something we cite in all of our NAMI classes. It's highly recommended. So based on the popular book, you need help. Dr. Mark Comrad will teach a variety of tactics to convince a troubled person in your life to have an evaluation by a mental health professional, from supportive persuasion through therapeutic coercion and to involuntary approaches. If this is not the workshop that you meant to attend, please click the back button on your browser or the sessions button on the left-hand side of your screen to return to all of the workshops we have available. We'll do questions at the end. Please throw those in the Q&A. Hopefully we'll get time to get to a few of them. As you can read more about Dr. Comrad at his website. I'll be sure to put that in the chat for everyone. So, Dr. Comrad, take it away.
Yes, hi, thank you very much. So thank you so much for inviting me back again. I think this is the 8th or 9th or maybe even 10th year that you've had me come speak about various topics. And I actually speak all over the country to NAMI affiliates, and some of you who've gone to NAMI National may have heard me a number of times at NAMI National. I want to really share with you something that has become kind of a special interest and a specialty of mine, and of particular value to NAMI, that I ended up creating a book about, a book that, which is, as you've heard, is used in the NAMI Family to Family course around the country. And in fact, NAMI is one of my secret weapons. I am very often referring patients and families to NAMI. And as a matter of fact, I think I once did a word search on my manuscript for the book, and I mentioned NAMI in the book about 23 times. So we're very natural partners in this. So I want to talk to you a little bit about this very difficult step. You know, there's so many different steps in the trajectory and the journey of people having state-of-the-art mental health treatment. And we're actually going to talk about several of those steps and some of the troubles that occur. But the most difficult step of all is often the first, which is trying to get somebody in the door, convince them to get treatment. So I just want to begin by telling you a little bit about sort of my own journey to get into this topic. Back in the 90s and the 2000s, I was Fraser, or maybe Fraser was me, I don't know. Because he might have come first, but we were certainly simultaneous. And I actually had a real radio show, not just played a psychiatrist on TV, called Comrad on Call on the American Radio Network. And that was a talk show, open phones for 1 hour, and a guest that I interviewed for another hour on a specific topic. And it broadcast across the United States. I had about 43 million listeners. I think my largest following was in California, in San Luis Obispo County for some reason, and in Hawaii, as a matter of fact. But the most popular part was open phones, where people would basically call me and ask pretty much any question you would want to inquire with a psychiatrist, both technical and treatment questions, as well as questions about the mental health system and so forth. I went on from there to an NPR show called Sunday Rounds, which was every Sunday interviewing doctors, and I was the regular psychiatrist on that show. And then some of you here in Maryland may remember on our Baltimore area NPR station, WYPR, there was a show called Midday with Dan Rodericks, the journalist from the Baltimore Sun. And he and I did a regular feature there, which was also a call-in radio show, Midday on the Mind. Well, especially in the open phones format, a very, very common kind of call that I would get is something like this. My mother, my son, my boyfriend, my grandfather is having some kind of emotional trouble that's beyond my ability to help. How do I convince them to see someone like you, a doctor like you, to get professional help for their troubled mind? So I answered that question several hundred times and really developed a specialty in that. So people from all over the country for some years thereafter have come to consult me about a family member and trying to convince them to get treatment. And I put everything that I've learned about this into this book, You Need Help. Rosalind Carter, the former First Lady, was very generous to contribute to this. She's actually written a number of books. This was sort of her, every First Lady chooses a specific area that they want to especially support and promote, and hers was mental health. And particularly, she's written these 3 books that you can see here about getting help, dealing with stigma, helping someone with mental illness. So that's the 2 of us there. So that she very generously contributed to that. And here is a table of contents of the book. And basically, we go from understanding what are mental health problems, what are the thresholds whereby you might really need more than just a good friend, a good shoulder, a good hairdresser to talk to, but actually professional help. A whole section we'll touch on in a moment about why you even need a book like this. You don't get a lot of books convincing someone to see an orthopedic, convincing someone to see a cardiologist, but we need a book. Why? There's a great deal of reluctance in this particular field. And then I go from the most persuasive and facilitative techniques all the way through some of the more coercive, hardball techniques that can be deployed. All right, so let's get into the topic a little bit. Some of you may remember back almost 10 years ago about the Navy Yard shooter down in DC. And here was a little news story about that situation.
It was September 16th of last year when Aaron Alexis went on a shooting rampage at the Washington Navy Yard. 12 people were killed and several others were wounded before officers shot the 34-year-old contract worker. His 2 sisters, including Naomi Alexis, heard about the shooting on the radio and had a feeling their brother was involved. Naomi believes Aaron suffered from severe mental problems that started when he was an adolescent. She says he would violently beat her when she was just 12 years old.
It was unprovoked a lot of the time, and a lot of time it was just over silly things. Like, I spoke while he was on the phone, so he would, punch me in the face.
When he was a teenager, she says he'd lock himself in his room blasting music for hours. Then came stories of torturing pets. Over the years, Naomi told her family he needed to see a doctor.
I would have violent, tearful outbursts and try to get my mom to be like, this is not right. There's nothing, this is not supposed to be this way.
But Aaron's actions were something the family just didn't discuss.
And do you think that perhaps there was a sense of shame?
I think absolutely there was a sense of shame or maybe helplessness. Like, they didn't know what to do. They didn't know how to address the situation without, labeling my brother mentally ill.
Naomi is telling her story, hoping families who have similar problems will call the National Alliance on Mental Illness to get help for their loved ones. She's also hoping to write a book about her experience, hoping her family's story will help others.
Nice that you mentioned NAMI. So the family often feels ashamed, powerless. And in fact, one of the points that I want to convey to you today is that the family often has power that is underused and that sometimes relies on other powers like doctors and police and emergency rooms and hospitals. But in fact, there are powers that are available to the family that can create some earlier intervention. Remember the Aurora movie theater shooter. Basically, the interview with his mother, she was quoted here in this article saying, if only we had talked about his problems, which they didn't. So as you know, more than many, those who attend here are aware that mental illness is fairly common. This was a campaign that the Maryland Foundation for Psychiatry, I'm on the board, put up in bus stops and in public transportation around the state. 1 in 4 people are felt to suffer from some form of mental disorder. Just in the year 2020, you see that about 21% of people have suffered from a mental illness. And if you want to say 2 or more mental illnesses, actually 35% suffer. So 21% have just one, and 35% have more than one, 2 or more. And we have an increasing problem in children. In this study from the Surgeon General, between ages 3 and 17, this was a decade long, there was a 36% increase in suicidal thoughts among children, a 44% increase in suicidal plans, and a 57% increase in suicide attempts. And this was all pre-COVID. And I'm not going to get into the statistics about how COVID has amplified and accelerated this trend, especially in children, but even in adults. But as we've talked about, reluctance to seek treatment is very common. So here, some of you may have seen the film Breaking Bad, and this is a traumatized DEA agent on the left who is clearly showing some problems that are related to trauma and starting to behave in ways that are concerning his partner who's on the right.
If you're not sufficiently stimulated by this investigation, do us both a favor and ask for transfer.
What is up with you lately? Starting bar fights? Turning down El Paso? And now this bullshit? Do you need to talk to someone or what?
Talk to someone. Talk to who?
I'm not trying to step on your toes, bro, okay? Just worried about you. That's all.
Appreciate that, bro. Take your hand off my shoulder.
Talk about the proverbial cold shoulder. And that's often what happens when you try to approach somebody. You meet a great deal of resistance. So the question is, who can help them? And what I'm here to tell you is that you may have more power and agency than you think. Because in study after study, and here's one of them, where people are asked, who would you turn to for help with emotional or mental problems? The majority answer is typically family or friends. That's who people turn to first. Not a healthcare professional, but people that they know and trust and love. And if you can have some tools and be empowered to receive that approach and parlay it into helping them then move to the next step to get a more professional evaluation and then treatment, that can be a much more successful path. So through you, the family or friends, is where the greatest path for success lies. Right, and one of the points that I want to make is the value of early intervention. As you saw with some of those video clips, the video clip from the news, you know, if we had only gotten in there earlier, if we only had talked about it sooner rather than later, made some kind of move, some kind of intervention, maybe awful outcomes can be prevented. I'd like to show this, albeit disturbing slide. This is from a cousin of mine who is a dermatologist, and some guy walked in to his office one day with this lesion on his thumb, and the doctor said, look, that really needs to be biopsied, and we need to remove it with a special procedure, so we'll come back next week and we'll do that. I made an appointment but never showed up for the appointment, and came back finally 2 years later, and by then this is what it looked like. So I think that makes the picture speaks 1,000 words about the value of early intervention. In psychiatry, particularly, many of the conditions that we have are prone to this phenomenon called kindling. I spoke about this in my last session. I gave the analogy of, dropping a cigarette on the couch, and first the couch smolders, and then the fabric catches fire, and then if you don't put it out, the wallpaper catches fire, and then the roof catches fire, and before you know it, you have a 5-alarm fire. Well, for many of the major mental illnesses, mood disorders, schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, each subsequent relapse that goes untreated actually causes the disease to accelerate, like a fire that's not being quenched early. So with continued relapse, we see shorter time between episodes of exacerbation. We see increased severity of each episode. Each episode is more resistant to medication, so that down the line, by the time you're into your 4th and 5th episodes, those are people who need multiple medications to be able to stabilize. And of course, with each subsequent episode, you get worsening disability from illness. So early intervention is critical for trying to prevent or minimize kindling. All right, so why don't people get help on their own? Why do we even need this discussion in this book? Frankly, that is the longest chapter in my book. Chapter 3, Why Mental Illness Goes Untreated. And I'm not going to take the time today to go deeply into this, because we could have an entire separate workshop on why in the world aren't people getting treatment for mental disorders. But just a couple of headlines here. Obviously, this audience is more familiar than most with the problems of stigma. And we in our country, particularly in the West, particularly in America, have a tremendous respect for autonomy and a tremendous celebration of the power of will, and sometimes overvalue the power of will. And the whole idea that something can overcome our will, reduce our power to deploy our free will, is something that's very, very difficult for us to accept. Many of these illnesses cause lack of insight. Goes by the fancy Greek word anosagnosia. I say you can't play that in Scrabble, although my wife tells me you can't. That you could actually play that word in Words with Friends. So because it's the brain that is afflicted, the same organ that is used to self-reflect and to self-observe, perhaps it's no surprise that sometimes when people are ill, they cannot see that they're ill, and other people can. And this is a particularly common problem, particularly in major illnesses like schizophrenia or acute mania. People just can't tell that they're ill. There's a lot of misinformation out there about psychiatrists, some misinformation even promoted and promulgated by celebrities like Tom Cruise, for example, who happens to be a Scientologist, and Scientology in particular recruits a number of celebrities who like to subscribe to their anti-psychiatry agenda. There is a significant manpower shortage in terms of trained mental health professionals, especially psychiatrists. Do you know that 44% of all counties in the United States have 0 psychiatrists? And there are 4,000 counties in the United States that have only 1 psychiatrist. So finding somebody and finding an open appointment is obviously an obstacle. And then this is not an exhaustive list. I go into many more in the book, but obviously cost, being able to pay for treatment, having insurance pay, having adequate insurance coverage is very significant. Here is the Marge and Homer Simpson making that point.
Homer, I didn't realize. I'm so sorry.
Marge, I want you to admit you have a gambling problem.
You know, you're right, Homer. Maybe I should get some professional help.
No, that's too expensive. Just don't do it anymore.
So not only having enough people, but you can see here, this is 1 year, couple of years ago, where we looked at different specialties and the percentage of people that took Medicare in that specialty and the percentage of doctors that took private insurance. So you see in both categories, the lowest, I mean, a tremendous outlier is psychiatry, in which 60% or fewer psychiatrists actually take Medicare or private insurance, and we can talk about that why that might be in the Q&A if you want. And then, of course, having insurance that covers mental illness at the same level that it would cover other kinds of conditions, coverage the same amount if you go to the dermatologist, as I showed you there, to have your lesion removed, or walk down the hall to have a session with a psychiatrist. That became the law of the land under Obamacare. But as you know, though you may set up regulations, not everybody follows regulations. And here's a map showing how different states have done with implementing equivalency or parity for mental health coverage. And you see that, A is only one, Illinois gets an A, and most other states get an F in terms of how they are implementing the law of the land with mental health parity. So those are a few of the reasons. And again, we could have a whole other session to dig into each of those as to why there are such barriers to people showing up. So our task here might be framed with starting with thinking about a case. Your brother called and suggested you keep your living room curtains closed because they might be watching. Who's watching, you ask him? The people in red cars. I saw 3 of them on my way home, and they all had license plates beginning with the number 3. And I think they're watching people who have 3 kids like you. This conversation only adds to the worries you have about him, like noticing he isn't changing his clothes very much. Seems to be a long time since he took a shower. And at the last family dinner with your parents, he came late, seemed very uncomfortable, and left abruptly. So how do we begin to approach somebody like this to convince them to get some help? Remember that the goal that I'm trying to help you with here, help the helpers, really is very simple. The goal is to get somebody in for an initial evaluation, just getting them in the door to do that. And what happens in that initial evaluation? Well, we try to answer the question, what is this? What's going on here? The father of medicine, ancient physician Hippocrates famously said that diagnosis is half the cure, but you have to know what you're dealing with before you know what to do with it. Because once you know what you're dealing with, which is really diagnosis, it leads to 2 other important things based on both experience, clinical experience, and what science and research has shown might be what is both the natural progression of that disease if it weren't treated, that's called prognosis, what to expect, and also what interventions might be effective in altering that prognosis, which is therapeutics or a treatment plan. So you really can't proceed until you know what you're working with. And there are so many different kinds of things that show up in a mental health professional's office, not all necessarily brain diseases, which I know is something that NAMI has a special interest in, but all sorts of problems related to traits and where those traits fall on the bell curve, problems related to motivated behaviors like addictions, problems related to the life story that you've had and the way in which trauma may have affected you. But the important thing is, where do we start? We start with an evaluation to try to answer the question, what's going on here? A diagnosis. All right. So in terms of approaching somebody like this brother in my scenario, First of all, it's important to choose the optimal time and the optimal place. Right here, the Simpsons are looking at Abu on the roof there and saying, can we talk? Well, it's not exactly the right time. An earlier time would have certainly been more desirable. So, in terms of picking the right time, I think there's some do's and some don'ts that I want to just touch on here. So one is, I think that picking the right time, you can prepare the way. I think that catching someone off guard and saying, hey, come here, I'd like to talk to you about something, is less effective than preparing them for a meaningful and important conversation. To be able to say, look, I'd like to come over on Wednesday and have a talk with you about something that's really important. So to create some anticipation and frame of mind that we're going to have some kind of a serious conversation. So to designate some special time in advance. And when that time comes, to begin by saying, look, I'm here to talk about something very serious, and I'd really like you to try to listen to me, and I'd like you to try to take me seriously. And to also find a place in terms of where it's emotionally neutral. I think that, in taking somebody into cornering someone in their childhood bedroom while you're visiting with your parents, that has all the associations of complex family dynamics, is not desirable. To try to find a place that's reasonably emotionally neutral. If you feel that the person has a problem where you're a little bit worried about your safety, it might be valuable to find a semi-public place, out in a park, on a park bench, obviously with some privacy, but also where there may be others around to help you actually with your sense of security and safety. Some important don'ts about time and place. Talking to people in the middle of the night. This is not an optimal time for people's cognitive and emotional functioning. This is where people's defenses are down and in which reactivity is high. Don't choose a time when you or your loved one, person of concern, is intoxicated. Do not approach people at family gatherings or special events. This is when people are trying to pull themselves together, be on their best behavior, hide their problems. So trying to reveal problems or uncover them during weddings and bar mitzvahs.
Thanksgiving. Yeah.
Right. I was just going to say Thanksgiving. Right. Not in the middle of an argument. When people are arguing, their limbic system is competing with their frontal lobes, their rational, reflective mental functions. So both when arguing and also shortly after the argument, it takes that emotional system, the limbic system, a while to calm down, to relax back to baseline. So to approach this, especially in advance, rather than spur of the moment, when somebody is behaving in a way that right there in front of you is distressing and upsetting, and you're distressed and upset, that is actually not the time to say, hey, listen, we need to address this behavior right here. No, you wait until things are calmed down the next day, later in the week, to say, remember what happened the other day? That really brings up something that I want to talk to you about. Let's have a time where we can sit down and talk about it. These are face-to-face conversations. In the time of COVID, that seems like an archaic thing. Although we're getting back to it, face-to-face, which we're not doing at the moment, but in person, not by email, not by text or social media or mail or Zoom or FaceTime. These are very important conversations in which presence really fortifies the vessel in which you are presenting this conversation. So once the conversation begins, remember the goal of the conversation is to convince the person to get an evaluation. All right. So here are some tips for the first approach. First, to acknowledge and say, look, I really want to acknowledge that this is a delicate, sensitive conversation, that we're going to talk about something here that's uncomfortable, and it may be uncomfortable for you, but it's also challenging and uncomfortable for me. To acknowledge that, to say that really the point of departure here is your relationship, because you as a loved one, as somebody who's in a caring relationship with this person, are in a very different posture than someone like me, who's a professional, who has a very different point of departure. So saying that it's very important to me, I'm doing this because I believe in our relationship, and I want our relationship to be of value to you and to be preserved. So I want to be able for us to talk about this in a way that allows us to stay connected. And
I think this is go ahead.
I'm coming at this from the departure of love. And again, this is your superpower. Your superpower that other people in the mental health drama don't have is love, is the caring connection that you have with this person. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, and I think that brings up something that comes up in classes a lot too, where, if you have the luxury of other people in this scenario, if it's a sibling you're worried about and you have other siblings, or if you're a parent and there's more than one running the show, it is worth considering, are you the best messenger for this? Because, from a strategic standpoint, if you do have really complicated family dynamics, if there's nobody else, then you're going to have to run with it. But sometimes who is saying it to them is so critical, as you said, and there might be someone else in the family who can make better inroads in that scenario. So it's certainly worth discussing and considering.
We'll touch on that point shortly. And being able to share, look, this is uncomfortable for me. The problems that we're talking about here, I feel helpless. I feel helpless to help you. So to be able to acknowledge your own limitations, which is why you're trying to steer things in the direction of supplementing what you have to offer. Focus on the specific thoughts or feelings or behaviors. I'm very, very worried about the fact that when after you drink, you often miss work the next day. Or I'm very concerned that what I'm observing is you will spend hours at the sink washing and drying and rewashing and redrying the dishes. I am very concerned that you have the curtains drawn and haven't come out of your room or showered for 5 days. So focus on the specific behavior. Be prepared for the reaction of the other person, who may be anger, without getting defensive. Absolutely avoid provocative words like labeling behaviors as sick or abnormal or crazy. Absolutely do not suggest the diagnosis. That is not what your role is here. That's what you're trying to bring somebody else in to be able to conclude. So don't say, I think you have OCD. I think you are an alcoholic. I think you may be paranoid. Do not try to deploy any kind of technical terms. One method that's often been successful with people is to ask for this as a gift. There's something our anniversary is coming up. There's something I would really love to have. It's not something you can get in any store. It's more precious than rubies. I'd like you to have an evaluation for these specific behaviors, or I'd like you to do that for the children, or the children's birthday is coming up. So sometimes asking for that as a gift can actually put people in a more transactional frame of mind. And sometimes, especially if you're in that kind of a relationship in which these behaviors are really affecting you and your relationship, sometimes it can be helpful to begin with, let's go together to get some counseling. Because very often it's in that context where the other person's specific presentation, it becomes obvious to the counselor that that person may need some extra help. And then that couples counselor can help to facilitate the way forward. And then if you've had specific experience in treatment, and that can be very helpful. You know, this is what helped me. I'd like to suggest that you might get a bite of the same apple. And this may take some time and a few tries. In terms of the value of other people telling you about their treatment experience, here's what Julie Andrews had to say about that.
My head was so full of clutter and garbage. And I thought, believe it or not, it was Mike Nichols who really tipped me into wanting to go to therapy, because he had been, I don't think he'd mind my saying that now, and he was so sane and funny and clear. He had a clarity that I admired so much, and I wanted that for myself, and I didn't feel I had it. Mm-hmm. So I went and got into it, and it saved my life in a way.
Why did you want to share that? What was that important for you?
But the truth is, Stephen, why not? If it helps anybody else have the same idea.
So here's what you want to pitch. You're pitching a one-time evaluation. You can just start with that. You don't have to get people to agree to go into treatment. Not at this point. Just let's try to answer the question, what's going on? As we'll talk about in a moment, it might not even be with a mental health professional. It might even be easiest with a primary care provider. Decrease barriers, offer to make the appointment, offer to go with them, offer if necessary to, I'll pay for it or I'll prepay for it. So anything that you can do to reduce the barriers to getting in there. Ask if you could go along, even if, I'll just sit in the waiting room, I'll be there for moral support, or if you want me, I can come in and we can talk with a doctor together. Now, as Helen was saying, you don't have to do this alone. It may take a number of allies to work with to cross the finish line, a number of other people of influence. Some people may have more influence than you. Some people may be better equipped to do this than you. So, some of the key allies, and I go into each of these in more detail in the book, is, other key family members, other siblings or friends, a primary care doctor, mention that in a moment. Clergy is often very important. My wife is a clergy person, and oftentimes clergy are very, very good at facilitating people to get more help. Clergies are very good at implementing the idea of higher powers, and that higher power is not just spiritual power, but they often, especially well-trained clergy, recognize that those higher powers can also be scientists and doctors and so forth. Sometimes employers can help under certain circumstances, a beloved coach, peer support groups. NAMI has a whole collection of peers that are available to support others. Bringing in somebody else who has had a similar kind of problem or have been in treatment can be very powerful. Support groups, of course, that goes without saying here, like the NAMI Family to Family course, that may actually be worth trying first before you try any of these other things. There's a tremendous amount of wisdom in the rooms there of people who have confronted this challenge before. And so it's a rich, rich resource of both ideas and information as well as emotional support. Consulting a psychiatrist yourself, as many people do. They come to me to have some guidance about what to do. And actually some of them are often my patients who say, okay, well, look, I've really gotten a lot of help. I'm worried about my sister. How do I begin to talk with my sister about it? So if you're already in treatment with somebody, bring up the person that you're worried about. books, memoirs, and movies to share with your loved one, like Russell Crowe in A Beautiful Mind. I have a number of recommendations in the book of things that if people are readers or they like movies, that can be very helpful. With regard to the primary care doctor, the fact of the matter is that primary care doctors, here in this one poll by Porter Novelli, showed that second only to family and friends, which we already talked about, was the number one choice of people when they need emotional help. The second choice, way above psychiatrist or psychologist or social worker, even above spiritual advisor, is the primary care physician. Here's one study that shows that men who had a better relationship with their primary care doctor were much more likely to get treatment for depression. So the primary care person is very critical. And in fact, who is treating psychiatric problems in this country? Let me tell you, there ain't enough of us to go around. As we talked about manpower, half the counties in the United States have 0 psychiatrists. Most psychiatric care is actually given by primary care doctors. 9 out of 10 antidepressants, for example, are prescribed not by psychiatrists, but by primary care doctors, as well as they should, because the fact is, it's just like you don't need a cardiologist to treat every case of hypertension. Only the malignant hypertensions, the more severe cases, primary care docs can do that. So in fact, your journey may not need to go beyond the primary care doctor, which is another reason why it would be good to either suggest an appointment or call up the primary care doctor yourself and say, listen, let me tell you about my friend or my sister. Remember, you can upload information to doctors. HIPAA does not restrict what a doctor can get from others. It only restricts what the doctor can give to others. So communicating with your loved one's primary care doctor is absolutely a channel that's open to you. And frankly, I have some specific tips like, write it, put it in writing, send it to the doctor and say, please add this to so-and-so's medical record. It puts them on notice that, they have been notified. It has to enter the medical record. And, then there's some accountability that this is an issue that they need to address. Then there's the whole issue of interventions.
Mom, can we talk to you? Can't talk. Keeping myself in a state of cat-like readiness. Neat. Anyway, Mom, maybe you should go into therapy. No, I don't need therapy. I'm fine, and it's too expensive.
And I don't believe in it. It breaks up families, turns wives against husbands, children against fathers, neighbors against me. You don't have to pay some fancy psychiatrist $10 an hour to get top-notch therapy.
Hello, radio psychic. You will die a terrible, terrible death. Oh, I'm sorry. That was our last caller. Okay, I'm getting something now. Huh. Okay, you will die a terrible, terrible death.
So as Helen said, not everybody is going to be helpful in an intervention, and some people may actually be harmful and may be, inadvertently enabling. I'm actually going to skip this slide because I want to move on here to sort of the next level. Okay, so you've tried.
I'm going to jump in and mention we've got about 15 minutes left.
Okay, you've tried facilitative conversations. You have tried your allies, but look, the fact of the matter is there are some illnesses that simply are not amenable to these kinds of conversational, facilitative, ordinary approaches. This is where the power of the family becomes the most critical. And to be able to move from persuasion, which is what we've been talking about, to, frankly, coercion. Humpty Dumpty says a word means whatever I want it to mean, nothing more, nothing less. So there are many words to describe this: caring coercion, therapeutic coercion, tough love. But the fact of the matter is that, look, the fact that you need, in order to benefit from methods of persuasion, you have to have the capacity for functional reason. And many illnesses diminish reason so that there's no longer a foothold for the utilization of persuasion. So that requires a different approach, which is coercive methods, closing some doors and opening other doors. And these methods are primarily available to families. And the most classic situation is where you're dealing with especially a child or an adult child that is, by virtue of their disorder, still under the largesse of the family. Because these methods that we're about to touch on, the value of them is that the only coercive method that are ethically appropriate are those that are designed to move someone in the direction of the kind of treatment that can restore or maximize or optimize the reasoning capacity that has been diminished by the illness. My other hat that I wear in my career is an ethicist. So I'm always thinking about, some of the ethical conundrums when it comes to involuntary or coercive moves. But as Hamlet says, diseases desperate grown by desperate appliance are relieved, or not at all. So, the fact is that, we like to have the language of rights in this country, but in families, we also need to talk about privileges. And privileges, basically in a family, are accompanied by responsibilities. So here what we're talking about is the privileges that are available in a family context that have to be earned by mobilizing the sense of responsibility to take care of your problem. So there are many privileges that a family gives, privileges like cell phone coverage, computer access and internet access, paying for car and gas and insurance, dollar subsidies, between spouses, doing household activities for one another, making dinner, doing laundries, vacations, and ultimately, even the roof over your head or the relationship. All of these are available. They're all up for negotiation as privileges that can be withdrawn and can be restored or given in response to taking the responsibility of treatment. So, for example, I had one family who adult child was kind of holed up at home, not working, clearly had a variety of symptoms of incipient, actually major mental illness, was totally on the internet all the time, and did not have a cell phone, but was using the family modem. And the parents basically said, we're putting a password on our modem, so you cannot access the modem. We will give you the password after you have had a consultation. All we wanted you to have is a consultation. We'll give you the password. And that got the young man into treatment. And by the way, they continued to use the password idea that continued to work to maintain the treatment and actually ultimately get him on medications. You may remember the Greek play Lysistrata, in which the women of Thebes decided they had seen too much war from the men. So in order to stop the war, they withheld sex from the men. The idea of withholding a privilege if you want to try to change behavior. And of course, the ultimate privilege is the privilege of housing. Robert Frost said, home is the place where when you have to go there, they have to take you in. But Thomas Wolfe said, you can't go home again. And sometimes at the end of the line, after a great deal of effort, sometimes that may actually be the ultimate privilege. But believe me, that has to be something that should be planned and worked out with an elaborate plan with a professional. And then we get to involuntary evaluation. And this is where all of your efforts to work as a family, to use both techniques of persuasion and techniques of coercion haven't worked, and you need to go to outside powers, basically the powers of the state. And in most jurisdictions, the criteria for having the authorities pick someone up and bring them into the hospital for involuntary evaluation are that somebody has to be imminently in danger to themselves or others. And, you know, those words, imminent and in danger, very much narrow the circumstances. Not that they might hurt themselves, but they're talking about hurting themselves right now, or they have a knife in their hand and they've been threatening somebody right now. Many people have, including NAMI, worried that this is too narrow. And as a result, there's now currently an attempt here in Maryland to draft a change in the regulations so that we can go beyond this language of being imminently in danger and also include people who are unable, without supervision and assistance, to meet their need for nourishment or medical care or shelter or self-protection or safety. And therefore, because they can't do that, they are at risk for harm, illness, or death. This would broaden to these dangerousness criteria in the statute to what is commonly called the gravely ill statute. This is supposed to be implied in the current statute, but many administrative law judges who are involved in involuntary commitment are not interpreting it in this broader way. So there's a move to change the statutory language, which hopefully will, in my opinion, hopefully will succeed. My book has a whole flow chart about what to do in the case of an involuntary situation and how to go mobilize the authorities, get people to the emergency department, what to say in the emergency department, what not to say in the emergency department, how to maximize the possibility, because not everybody who gets taken to the emergency room gets admitted to the hospital. As a matter of fact, the minority of people who get taken to the emergency room get admitted to the hospital. The majority, 90%, are released without any treatment, actually. So what can you as a family say or do to minimize, if it's already come to the point that you can't handle this anymore and somebody needs an involuntary level of treatment? There are various things that you can do and say, and I don't have time right now to go down the list here about how to optimize the opportunity of having someone in involuntary treatment. Emerson said it's one of those beautiful compensations of this life that no man can sincerely try to help another without helping himself. So the act of being of help can be of great value to you. I'm actually going to skip this. I just want to point
we have
out,
got about 5 minutes left, roughly.
Okay. I want to point out that certain celebrities are really helping try to promote the idea of treatment. The Pope revealed for the first time that he consulted a psychiatrist. Here's Prince Harry.
But you need to know that part of being strong and tough is having the courage to ask for help when you need it. You must not silently suffer. You are all in this together. And if I may speak personally, we are all in this together, because asking for help was one of the best decisions that I ever made. You will be continually amazed how life changes for the better.
So this is a journey, and it does not look like the arrow on the left. It looks like the arrow on the right. It may take multiple tries, multiple iterations. And the important thing is to not give up, to not say, well, I tried to talk to them about it and, they said, no, I'm not interested. So, I tried, there's nothing more that I can do. Going to each level that I spoke about is critical, and it requires perseverance and support, and you may need support from others for yourself in that journey such as this kind of support that NAMI offers. So thank you. I know that I've run up against the clock here, but maybe there's time for a few questions.
Yeah, this has been terrific. Thank you so much. We do have a number of questions here. How do you help someone continue trying therapy if the reason they're avoidant is because they find it very painful to talk about bad things that have happened to them?
Right. So, therapy is not, there's so many different forms of therapy. In fact, there are, at this point, maybe 380 named forms of therapy, right? So everybody has the idea, probably from the movies, therapy is laying on the couch. And in fact, the universal symbol of therapy is still the cartoon of someone laying on the couch, right? Talking about their past, bringing up painful things and so forth. And of course, that can be valuable and important. But I think that overcoming the stereotype that what going into treatment means is necessarily, one, always being on medication. Two, looking into traumas and events and problems in the past. I mean, that may be valuable and important, but it's not necessarily, it's not even necessary to start that way. And as a matter of fact, in the case of somebody who may have to deal with important trauma that has had a legacy, a skilled trauma therapist will actually not start with the trauma, right? Will gradually they build a therapeutic alliance. They talk more about the here and now and what are some of the functional problems, and really gradually, based on that therapeutic alliance, begin to then move into more sensitive material. But in terms of you as the helper, is to say, therapy is not all about just, confronting your pain. It's, at the end of the day, it's about helping you function, helping you, feeling better and functioning better.
So another question is, telehealth has made treatment more accessible for many. Some family members might be more amenable to getting an assessment if they don't have to leave home. Is this a good thing, or are there drawbacks to virtual treatment for those who are resistant?
Well, there are pluses and minuses. There are no solutions, there are only trade-offs. But with regard to our particular mission here that we're talking about today, I think teletherapy is a tremendous boon, tremendous value, particularly, by the way, for young people who are, who grew up in the digital environment, right, on social media and so forth, are much more comfortable. And, for many of them, they can meet with you from the privacy of their bedroom, where they're surrounded by their things of comfort and their stuffed animals and so forth for children. So I actually think, and many people have seen this, that both the stigma, going into a psychiatrist's office, used to be my office was at Shepherd Pratt. And a lot of people didn't want to come to Shepherd Pratt, the psychiatric hospital, to get help. Now my office is, across the street from the Towson Courthouse. So, it's much less of a barrier. And of course, the convenience, the tremendous convenience, as I think we were talking about before we started, is, people have really taken to telehealth. Psychiatrists have, and many people, now that we're starting to see people back, they don't want to come in. They're finding it too easy and convenient to continue to meet this way. And let me tell you, meeting this way, its limitations notwithstanding, is absolutely better than not meeting at all.
We probably only have time for maybe one more question. In my job, I often receive requests for assistance from families who have an adult child with no insight into their illness, refuses connection to resources, has never been admitted inpatient. Any suggestions for those families on how to get their loved one in front of somebody?
Yes. Well, first, my tongue-in-cheek answer, which is give them my book, which is tongue in only one cheek rather than two, and refer them specifically to Chapter 8, which is the chapter on therapeutic coercion. Because look, what I tell families is that enabling is basically part of love, right? It's the other side of love. Nobody enables a problem deliberately, right? The best of intentions are often the beginning of the path that leads to enabling. And so enabling is the flip side of love. It is always, in my opinion, inadvertent. Nobody's trying to create malice or exacerbate problems, right? So seeing how you might be enabling. So a lot of times when I'm doing these consultations with the family, I'm telling them how, you might want to reconsider this behavior. And so one thing to do is to suggest that maybe the family member consults a mental health professional to talk about the situation, to see the extent to which there may be enabling, and to think about how not only removing the enabling factors, but working with this idea of therapeutic coercion to create power within the family to steer people down the corridors that ultimately lead to healing.
Well, this has been absolutely fantastic. We know we have a plenary session coming up in a little bit. So actually, Danielle, how much time do we have until the next session starts? I don't know if Danielle's actually with us right now, but that's all right. This has been terrific.
Continue to answer a few questions. And
yeah, I just want to bump up against the next thing, but I just want to reiterate to folks that if you go into the chat, I've dropped a few links in there for you guys. One of them is the connection@namimd.org email address. So if you have questions that haven't been addressed here, we're going to be collecting those and trying to get back to people, creating frequently asked question sheets when appropriate. So connection@namimd.org. And a couple of people were asking about your book. Start at the website. So start at comradmd.com. But you can also find it on Amazon. It's just under $15 for a new copy. And if cost is an issue, there are used ones.
Let me say the book itself has a website. The website is youneedhelpbook.com. Youneedhelpbook.com. I want to put that in the chat.
That's a great one. And it's not a hard one to remember. So I'm going to put it right in there now.
And if you want to tell friends about it, just say, look at youneedhelpbook.com. And
we do, if you have not already taken any of our courses, that's the other response to the question about someone whose loved one just is absolutely refusing treatment. If you haven't been to family yet, that's a great place to start because we cite his book in that content. But you're going to be in a room with a bunch of other families, or a virtual room as the case may be, who are going through something similar, and you may be able to get tips and tricks from your peers in that scenario. So that's another place to go. Okay, why don't we see if we can address one or two more questions. Let's see, we've got yes, and not just questions, but complaints about the whole imminently in danger is definitely a bar. Yeah. So there's
what people understand is that it is very painful for families to come up against these narrow cataracts of moving forward. But it's also, I wouldn't compare, of course, but it's also painful for the treating doctor. It's very, very frustrating for us too.
Yeah, and to that point, we had a question about how do you feel about the provider attitude of, well, might need to let things get bad enough to go to the ER mentality when the patient is refusing treatment. Is there any other way?
Well, yes, and in fact, I've devoted 259 pages to other ways, plural. So it's not all or nothing. I'm helpless as a family member until things get bad enough where I can use power greater than the family, or different than family, the police and the judges and the hospital. So now that being said, there is a certain truth that if all of those other methods, which I hope the advising doctor is not skipping over to try and counsel you on, if all of those methods don't work, then sometimes if you're at that final point where you're ready to go to escalate to that next step of involuntary treatment, yes, sometimes things may have to get worse before they get better. And by the way, they don't have to get necessarily so much worse to have somebody involuntarily brought to the ER. The problem is once they're there, what can be done? And that's where the criteria really come in, because the criteria about what are we going to do once we have in the ER? Are we going to send them home, or are we going to bring them into the hospital? That's where the tipping point is there. And yeah, sometimes that's why one of my pieces of advice is make sure that you are there at the emergency room, that you are talking directly with the evaluators, that you are putting on the absolute worst face on the situation that you can. Don't lie, okay? But make it, bring out, this is not the time, to be embarrassed, to hide things. This is the time to bring out the absolute worst that it is, to really make the case for why the criteria may be met of imminent and dangerous. Hopefully will eventually have gravely ill, and why you cannot handle this at home. And sometimes I've even advised people to say, look, I want you to understand that we cannot deal with this at home. So we're going to be leaving, and if you discharge this person, you're going to have to discharge them to the streets. And a lot of folks will be very reluctant to do that, and say, if you're going to discharge him, I hope you discharge him to the hospital, because we cannot take them back home. It's an extreme measure. It's not for everyone. It's not a universal recommendation, but sometimes it's worked.
Mm-hmm. And I think this is a good time to reiterate what you said earlier about, HIPAA is not about HIPAA is about protecting the patient's privacy. So it limits what a doctor can tell you. So you could even show up to the ER, and unless your loved one has verbally or written or stated to the doctor that, yes, you can share my information, they're going to be very limited in what they can share about your loved one if your loved one is over 18. But that doesn't stop you from sharing everything with the provider. So,
and as a matter of fact, I would go even further. I would, if possible, if you have the time, prepare in advance for this eventuality. Write down the whole history.
Yep.
Since 2 years ago, this has been happening, and that happened, this happened, and in the last week, this is what happened. First of all, it's very valuable to have that documentation for the chart, because that note will travel with your loved one when they go into the hospital, right? So that they don't have the history just from the patient, right? And it's there and it's documented. And of course, in that documentation, really put on the worst possible deployment of facts.
Yeah, and this is where in the NAMI classes we also have samples of treatment records that you can keep at home. So if your loved one has gone in or has been on medications, keeping track of that is a really is a really critical tool, because if you're able to show up and actually have all of this documentation of different things that have occurred in the past, the provider is going to take you a lot more seriously. But all right, with that, we should wrap up, because it's time in just a few minutes for the plenary session about NAMI's new book. So I hope we'll see you all there. Thank you so much, Dr. Comrad. This has been absolutely fantastic.
You're welcome, and thank you all for your attention. And I wish you all the power and the persistence to get your loved ones across this goal line.
Yeah, it takes a lot of courage to stick with it. So any of you that are doing that, know that that's where that bravery is at. So
and reach out.
Thanks so much, guys. Yeah, absolutely, and keep an eye